Why do we use the boxing stance when planing? Boxing stance would be a wider stance where you have your feet further apart. This allows you to have more control and balance over your body. This is very important when using the plane. This stance can also be related to other sports where control, balance and accuracy is also very important. For instance, free taker in soccer, golfer, free taker in hurling and also a tennis player. Having good control and balance over your body can be very important for the health and safety aspect in the woodwork classroom. With the balance and control over the tool, it reduces the risk of stumbling with the tool in your hand. This comes down to the center of gravity, where you're spreading your body weight over a large surface area with your legs spread apart, compared to having your feet closer together, having minimal control and balance. This allows for control over both the tool and the piece you are creating for a lot more precision and accuracy. When using the plane, it is important to keep your shoulder, elbow and wrist in one continuous straight line to provide enough pressure from your body weight to ensure that you take off the material in which you intend to take off. As you can see, it's one continuous straight line. You're keeping your shoulder, elbow and your wrist in one continuous movement. This allows for control, balance and precision when using the tool. So how do we hold the tool? When holding the tool, it's important that you create a nice firm grip on the handle and also on the knob on the top of the plane. Like the tenon saw, we use our index finger pointing out to ensure we have control over the tool. If we don't have our index finger pointing out, you don't have as much control over the plane as you would when you use your index finger to provide good control over the tool. This is very important for the precision and accuracy when using this tool. When setting the piece and device, it is very important to set the surface in which you are planing parallel to the vise, or the line in which you are planing parallel to the vise, as shown in the video. This is very important for the precision and accuracy in when you're using the plane. This allows the whole sole of the plane to be rested along the piece of material, and you're working with the plane parallel to the vise or the bench, similarly to the piece when it is set perfectly in the vise. This provides good accuracy and precision when using the plane. This is why we set the piece parallel in the vise, so we can use the plane parallel to the bench and the vise instead of having it at an angle, creating an awkward position to work at. This also allows us to provide equal pressure the whole way across the piece of material. As you can see, you're putting pressure with the toe down at the beginning, then the middle of the plane, and then the heel. This is providing equal pressure the whole way across the material, as the blade is at the top of the plane, so you're providing equal pressure the whole way across the plane. This is very important for the precision and accuracy when planing to ensure you remove even strips of material in which you're trying to create. If you don't do this, you prevent around the corners at the end of the piece by not providing enough pressure down equally across the plane. When using the plane, it's important to keep all the previous principles in which I've talked about in place. As you can see, I have the piece parallel in the vise and using the boxing stance. This is to provide good control and balance and accuracy over the tool and also over the piece of material. As you can see, I'm putting equal pressure from the toe all the way to the heel across the piece of material. This keeps the plane level on the piece and prevents you from rounding the corners. As you can see, my wrist, elbow and shoulder are all in one line. After planing, a shaving from the piece of material is provided. This shows if you are taking off equal material all the way across the piece, as shown in the video. Another key principle in using the plane is in the direction of which you're planing. It is very important to always plane in the direction of the grain. So when you're planing, you're always planing with the grain as shown in the video. In the video, you can see that this place that the grain is running parallel to the surface. But when we want to plane the cut angle, we now see the direction in which the grain is running. So the key principle in planing is always plane with the grain. When we look at the top piece, we can see that when you're planing, that if you were planing against the grain, it would begin to chip up the fibers and provide a very rough finish. So this is why we're going to plane with the grain and not against the grain. So going back to the previous principle, it's always important to keep your piece that you're planing parallel to the vise and parallel to the workbench to ensure that when you're planing, it's easy for you and provides less strain when planing. So when we begin to plane with the grain, it's pressing the fibers down into the wood and removing the material in which we want to remove. This is why it's important to plane with the grain all the time, as you are compressing the fibers down into the wood. So what would happen if you began to plane against the grain? As you can see, I'm after turning the piece of material around in the vise, and I'm setting the surface in which I'm planing parallel again to the bench and the vise. So we keep the plane in the parallel position as previously talked about. As you can see, it's a lot harder to plane against the grain as the blade is sticking into the material and pressing up the fibers of the wood. As you can see, this creates a rough finish because the blade is sticking into the material, sticking up the fibers of the wood. This is why we plane with the grain, as we are pressing the fibers into the material and we don't plane against. When planing the end grain, it's always important to follow the grain as previously talked about. When we're planing the end grain, we position a waste piece of material the same thickness in the vise up against the side in the direction in which we're going to plane against. This is going to compress the fibers into our main piece of material, preventing breakout. As you can see, I'm positioning the piece parallel to the vise to ensure that we use our plane as previously talked about. As you can see, I'm planing in the direction of the grain. As the end grain is slightly curved, I'm using the curve motion to go around, planing with the grain. This is important as you're not going to break the fibers and the blade is going to go with the grain and make a smooth finish. As you can see, the waste piece of material is pressing up against our main piece, keeping the fibers at the end of our piece intact and not breaking out. So now I'm going to plane the end grain without the piece of material pressed up against the end. The blade is going to drive the fibers of the material out at the end grain . As you can see, the fibers have broke off at the end because there's no piece of material up compressing the fibers, causing the breakout to happen. This is why we position this piece of material up against the end grain to prevent this from happening. This is a very important principle involved in planing the end grain of the material. It is important to remember that when planing the end grain that you use the block plane. The jack plane is used in the demonstration just to highlight the key principles which are involved, but the block plane is a lot more accurate and precise when planing end grain as it is a lot smaller and the sole of the plane sits a lot more comfortably and accurately on the end grain in which you're planing. It is a lot more controllable and accurate when planing the end grain, and this is why the block plane is always used when planing the end grain.